Mercury and Ketu. Always an interesting combination when you get a planet with Ketu, because we know that Ketu represents our past lives, the flag that we have planted on a mountaintop and said, here, I am successful in this. So Mercury and Ketu often shows an individual who in past lifetimes has developed security based on their intellect, based on understanding how to manage the world in a very efficient fashion. Mercury deals with thinking, Ketu deals with the sublime, Ketu deals with mystical processes, so it can create a very mystical type of thinker. It gives the capacity to have a very subtle thinking. So as with Rahu, where the person has insights and intuitions, but they're not quite sure how they get there. With Mercury and Ketu, the person tends to understand that things come through a mystical or intuitive conduit. And a person with Mercury and Ketu tends to be focused on more subtle things, like possibly the occult, or that which is of a spiritual nature, or the nature of consciousness itself. It can give great skills in the exploration of physics and the physical sciences when you get into the more minute levels of things, quantum physics, quantum sciences, and so on. Mercury and Ketu can make a person a very quick thinker. Sometimes it can make a person seem erratic and highly changeable with their mind. But really, they're just taking things in very quickly and shifting to the next thing. Now, with Ketu shows that in past lifetimes, a person has put probably way too much time and attention onto developing their rational mind and their rational understanding. Now, that means in this lifetime, the individual will have a great capacity to be rational and use the rational mind, but they put too much emphasis on it. And they're going to put too much trust in it, in the sense that it will create a lot of doubt and confusion for the person. Because just like with Saturn and Mercury, the person will always have this sense that there's just a little bit of information missing. So when you get Mercury and Ketu, they're sometimes hard to counsel or hard to speak to about things on a rational level, on a linear level, because they'll always have the sense that they're just missing something. That they can't quite make a decision until they get just a little bit more information. And the thing is that there's never a little more information. So again, this is another combination where a person needs to develop their Jupiter, their capacity for faith, trial and error, seeing what happens, and learning from that. Ketu is meant to develop this capacity for intuition, for noticing their gut instincts. They're focusing on this lifetime to let go of their need to define everything intellectually. So when you get a Mercury Ketu individual interested in things like yoga, meditation, spirituality, they've got a lot of potential, but they're often the hardest types of people to make the jump to the next level. Because the jump to the next level is letting go of conceptualization, letting go of the intellect. And that's, in a sense, their safety blanket. And it can feel extremely scary to do that, because all they know is their mind and their intellect, because they focused on that in past lifetimes. So it can make a person very rigid when coming upon paradigms that are radically different. Meaning, if, spiritually speaking, if a Ketu Mercury person comes up to a guru or a spiritual teacher and says, will you teach me? And the teacher says, yeah, I'll teach you, but you have to let go of everything you think you know about the spiritual path. That might be a really enlightened individual that they're coming to for guidance, but they'll miss it because they'll say, I can't let go of my concepts. The teacher will, instead of making them sit to meditate for 9 hours a day, which is what the Ketu Mercury person would expect, instead says, go scrub the floor of this pregnant woman's house to help her out, for the next 3 weeks, to help develop the person's karma. And it's very different than what they were expecting. And they have to learn to let go of this intellect. They have to let go of this rigidness in order to make growth in this way. There can be a real resistance to new ideas, because oftentimes in the past, the Ketu Mercury person has been able to prove things logically, to know just how it's supposed to be. And if they don't necessarily have that feeling, they'll not give anyone else the time of day. They won't necessarily be able to accept anyone else's debate, no matter how intelligent it is, because they might be stuck in an old mode of thinking. But since they are so intelligent, even if they're wrong, they'll be able to win the debate intellectually. That's why in a book called Tripura or Hasya. They talk about spirituality and the problem with dry polemics. Dry polemics. That's when a person can talk the talk and talk it very well, but they don't have any realization. And that's often true with a Mercury Ketu individual. They'll be able to intellectualize, to talk, to reason, to bring doubt into other people's minds so that it seems like they're saying what's actually true. But it might not actually be true because some things transcend the reason and the intellect. When Mercury and Ketu are negatively impacted, particularly from Saturn or Mars, this can give a great sense of anxiety, a great sense of indecisiveness, a great lack of faith, period. So learning to develop one's faith, to live life in a trial and error fashion and trust that when things go wrong, hey, that's just part of being alive. That can really help a Mercury Ketu individual. But it's not easy because there's a lot of anxiety there, usually about making mistakes. And on the positive side, just like Mercury and Rahu with the nodes, Mercury with any node, it gives a great capacity for research, deep thinking, probing analysis. But the trick is trying to navigate, well, when is it the person paying attention to their mind? And when is it actually intuitive, sublime, mystical, subtle thinking, right? That's what they have to learn, that balance, which is not always easy. And when they're off balance, it creates a sense of chaos within the mind, turbulence, confusion, even anger can come up because the person knows what they think is right, but they can't quite express it or they can't quite figure it out because there's just one piece of information missing. And again, this will be appropriate related to the house that these combinations fall in. So whatever house it falls in, generally it's going to be that house where you have those kinds of problems. But since it is falling in your birth chart or your natal chart, it will be a general characteristic of the whole chart. But the house is the area of life where you're often going to find the problem. And whatever house that Mercury rules over will also be where you're going to find the kinds of challenges discussed here that one will have to put more attention to and to do their best to work through and overcome.